area, we have discussed it for last 7 years. The first is PEMC in Korea in 2005, then MX and East Asian Sea Congress and COP-CBD-10. So you can easily notice that it's discussed mainly in Asia-Pacific area. After 7 years of discussions in the international communities, we have published 2 important reports. The first one is the sub-global report under the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment. This is the ecosystem assessment in Japan. It is titled Satoyama Satoumi Ecosystem. Satoyama means village mountains. Satoumi means village seas. And human well-being. So, and this was published by United Nations University. Also, the second report is the CBD technical series. And we have now the example of the report, and this is an introduction video. So please let me circulate. This report was published last year. So Satoumi is a bottom-up type activity by local people with special reference to the existing services. And in many cases, local fishers, organization of local fishers is the core of local activities to restore or conserve local ecosystem structures and functions. The second point is Satoumi has enough possibilities for the sustainable coastal management in which not only fisheries but human well-beings, not only human well-beings for fisheries sector but also human well-beings for the urban sectors or other people are more focused. So Satoumi concept is not only biological, biophysical ecosystem, but also the human, social, ecological system. Finally, Satoumi initiative can work in countries or areas where a lot of people are living in the coastal area, directly relying upon the marine ecosystem services, like the livelihood we have just discussed. So, for example, in Asia-Pacific area, African coastal area, Mediterranean, indigenous communities, in these areas, local people can play a vital role in coastal conservation and sustainable ecosystem uses. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, I hope that you have a lot of questions about the subject of the crossings between conservation and biodiversity. I would like to ask Carl Lundin, the head of the Global Marine and Polar Program of IUCN, to just start reacting because he has other meetings and he may have to leave us. So Carl, could you just tell us a few things on your reaction to that issue?
Thank you very much. I think this has been a very exciting and interesting discussion. I guess from my perspective, overall, I share a large part of the analysis that Serge and Jake has given us. I have a couple of things that I want to provoke the discussion with. The first one, I think, is the assumption that we have to continue with global population growth at the level we have. I think as a conservation community, we very rarely have the guts to stand up and say, this is a real issue. In my pavilion, the Blue Planet Pavilion, we're actually running a clip from Jacques Cousteau right now. And the interesting thing is, already in the 70s, he said that, with this rate of increases, the oceans are toast. And in fact, he's proven to be right. Now, I think as a species, we have to ask ourselves, is it actually an unimpeachable human right to reproduce as much as you actually want? So my feeling is this is a question that needs to come onto the conservation agenda. It needs to be in the development agenda, because if you look at the countries that actually succeed with developments, many of them are the ones that control population. I think China is a striking example of a country that's actually done exceedingly well. Part of it is actually dealing with the issue of population. This is a tough problem. It has lots of ethical issues. There's no doubt that this is something that hits at the heart of what is being a human. I also think we need to start having this discussion. So I'm just putting it on there, but I think it is underlying the whole premise of your discussion, and to me it's at the heart of it. Associated with that is the fact that we have 1 billion pets on this planet. Many of them actually consume fish as their primary source of protein. You know, that's just the dogs, then there are the cats and a lot of the other ones. Now, I'm not saying that we should eat our pets, or if we aren't here, but I would say that we need to be careful in terms of also looking at the associated human uses, and perhaps there are issues there as well that can help alleviate the future of what we're doing here. My second point is about aquaculture. Perhaps I have a slightly more positive view of agriculture than what came through in your presentation. My feeling is that, you know, the overall room for increasing fisheries is not going to be particularly great. I mean, even in the best case scenarios, if we're dealing with wild populations, you know, the only thing we could possibly try to do is, you know, fertilize the oceans, have more productivity somewhere. In some ways we've done that. That tends to work really badly. I mean, our current ways of doing that haven't been particularly successful. So that pretty much means all of it has to come out of aquaculture. Now, some aquaculture we've done for hundreds, if not over 1,000 years, and actually I think we're getting a handle on it, and I think some of it can be very sustainable. We have a luxury segment, which I think casts a shadow over the rest of the industry and gives people the idea that this is unsustainable. I think that's an incorrect analysis. I think if you actually look at the long-term sustainability of aquaculture, and my organization IUCN has really tried to engage in that, I think that's the way to go, and you know, we need to come to where we are with agriculture. I take your point that there's a big footprint from agriculture. There will be a big footprint from agriculture, but we also have a lot of people who are hungry, and I think we need to make that trade-off. So it's not going to come out of wild caught, it's going to come out of the aquaculture. Then the question is, how can we get the protein that's needed for the aquaculture, and you know, what are the ways of minimizing the negative impacts of the rest of the ecosystem there? And I think there's a lot of work to be done by fisheries managers. That's also something that conservation groups need to address. And I think many conservation people have made it too easy for themselves and basically said, this is not something that we want to do, it's bad, so we should be against it. And that's a very primitive way of looking at it. We need to have a strong engagement with the aquaculture industry, make sure we work in the direction of sustainability. I think we can learn a lot from our colleagues working on forests. They've really tried to do that in a more meaningful way, and I think the conservation groups have a lot of work to be done there to improve their way of thinking. My third point, I guess, is I don't entirely agree with you that the fisheries managers have done all they can in terms of getting the maximum out of the resource. My own country, Sweden, and in the strait we have with Denmark, in Öresund and in Kattegat, we actually set aside a ban on using nets and trawls in this strait. Whereas Kattegat, which is the sea area just to the north of this, 10 times as large, did not do that. This ban was infected in the 1930s. What we used to have catching in Kattegat was 10 times as much cod as we would catch in the strait between Sweden and Denmark. It was 10 times the size of the area. It's a very easy thing to consider. Today, we actually continue to have the trawl fishing in the Kattegat area. We're now down to about 1% of what we used to catch in the 1930s, whereas this fishing going on in the Öresund is actually at the same level as it was in the 30s. So there's actually a tremendous amount of loss of resource here, and you know, there is that thing, and so there is a win-win here and there. I don't think we should say that that's going to solve the whole issue, but it certainly can be improved on. I think as you know, resource managers, we also take the responsibility to say we haven't been as good as we could be. We have some work to do. I think it comes to the whole issue of destructive fishing, and you know, I do feel we need, I think probably as you're trying to do here, build bridges there and you know, say what is destructive fishing. And sometimes it can be hard for people to understand what it is, because they've been doing it for a long time, or they feel it's the most efficient way to do it. But in fact, it does have secondary ecosystem effects, and the long-term health of the system is in jeopardy also. I'm often struck by how European fishermen seem hell-bent on destroying their own resources. very hard for me to understand why they've gone down a path where they want to continue fishing things which are, really a lost cause. I mean, eels in Europe, for example, we're down to 0.5% maybe of the eels we used to have. I mean, it's extraordinary, the idea that you continue to hit the last one. If you were a farmer, you had 100 cows, you killed 99 of them, you're still beating up this last cow. I mean, what's wrong with you? You would never do that. And so there are a number of stocks where you just sort of think we're way beyond where we should be with them, and that needs to be rethought. So I think that destructive fishing is something that's a reality, and perhaps we can find ways of working between our two communities to come to some more positive things there. The other thing I think is, I've always felt there's three main things we need to do in fisheries. First one is don't fish more fish than there are, and I think we're all in agreement on that. It's a simple thing to say, it's very hard to actually make it happen, but I do believe with improved knowledge of fisheries we can do a lot, and that is the way to go. And that's where we need to work together more closely between the different people who know about oceans. The second part of it is an economic argument, and that's the World Bank study of the sunk billions. We really need to make sure we can manage this and make money out of it. Currently, most fisheries management actually cost more than what the economic gains are out of it in at least all industrialized countries. That has to change. I mean, we have to have an industry that actually generates surplus so that we can tax it like every other economic activity. And right now, we're not doing that. Granted, we need sort of ways to deal with food security, but the vast amount of fisheries in the world are actually suboptimally managed from an economic standpoint, and I think that can be addressed in various ways. And then the third part of it, I think, is the political will to distribute the resource. And I think a lot of what goes wrong in fisheries management is really about this issue, and that's a social issue. It's a societal issue of choice, and depending on the political openness in a society, I think it's having an honest debate about what are the choices, what actually makes economic sense, how can we divide resources, how can we compensate people who need to leave using certain types of resources, how can we actually make the new beneficiaries pay compensation to other people. They are not easy things to do. These are difficult things that take time to work in place, but I still feel we have a very primitive way of looking at it. We haven't really advanced all that much on that. So that, I think, would be an area for lots more work. My personal sense is in some parts of the world, and particularly when it comes to coastal fisheries, we've had too much of a technological development, so we're getting better and better at getting these few fish out, which means the poor people or the marginal people are marginalized out of the system. Now, if a society wants to have healthy coastal populations with people who actually have livelihoods, then we need to restrict or change some of the technology that we're using. I'm not saying we should go backwards, but I do think we need to make sure that we actually give benefits to the people society wants to give benefits to. That means some people are losers, and we need to make sure that the losers actually then compensated or given other opportunities. But it's not an easy thing, and perhaps we're not all the right people here in the room to deal with this, but I think it's at the heart of where a lot goes wrong in this sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carl. So at that stage, I would like to open now the meeting for open that session for discussion.
Serge, if I could have, I did check the Callagher report on waste in fisheries. The waste due to discarding, catching fish and not using them, the best estimate for 2005 is 7 million tons. The 40 numbers in the 40 include bones, heads, tails, fins. That's the conversion from the fish taken out of the water to the fish actually available to eat. But the waste due to catching and not using for the planet is in the neighborhood of 7 million tons. Less than 10% of what we need to recover.
Okay, so everything is on the table for discussion, and so I'm quite happy to face the questions I'm sure you have. If you don't have, we're going to invite a few. So who wants to take the floor and react to what our three speakers have been saying? But express concern. There's a mic there. So.
First of all, excuse my poor English. And I'm very interested in the theme of Sataomi aspects because I'm coming from the field and I work with the community, local community, which has the same problems. And we work with the same methodology. We call it eco-socio-systemic approach. In this case, maybe when we are working in somewhere with such new methodologies, we have problems with academic science, which doesn't control this kind of methodologies. And then, as NGOs, we can have some opportunities to learn from others' experience. And then I just want to highlight that even if we reach some results with this system, with this method, we have problem with the local administration and local. So, for example, I made a motion that has been not understood, like to use this socio-ecosystemic approach. Our members don't know it, so it could not be proposed as well. So this is the kind of problem we have. As a systemic approach, we can have lots of kind of problems that we want to measure and evaluate, to have a local action plan that comes from the bottom to the top. Then we will have actions. Also, we want to have these actions from the top to the bottom to find compromise.
Yeah, I agree. Yes, I agree. Well, actually, the bottom-up approach is very often very cost-effective to implement new measures, but it does not necessarily mean it is effective enough to conserve the ecosystem structures and functions. So we need thank you very much. We need capacity development. Also, we need scientific support from the local government or the universities. So these are very important things, I think.
Minister of Fisheries in Norway. I have a question regarding the use of forage in aquaculture. I know there's a lot of reasonable criticism of this practice. Many people mean that it's a waste of food. But I have a question. Does it really matter whether the predator is in captivity or in the free when it comes to net loss of biodiversity or biomass in the ecosystem? I wonder if someone have a good answer to that.
Someone has an answer to that? I have always had this problem in my mind, and I always suspected that the salmon eats a lot more protein when it is in the middle of the Pacific than when it is in a pen. I'm sure that you need a lot more protein to feed a fast-running salmon than you need to feed an adult salmon sitting in a pen. So somehow, in terms of protein, I believe it's more efficient to feed in the pen and let it feed in the Pacific, but that's not a good proposal, of course. Salmons are supposed to feed in the Pacific, not in the pen. But yeah, you're right. The criticism, I always found that somebody should look carefully at the criticism that we are using fish to feed predators. If you think that less predators outside would eat more fish than the fish we are feeding them with. So then you say, if it's a problem of balance, what's the problem? There may be other problems. You feed the salmon in Chile with fish coming from whatever, Denmark or something. You have some discussions about the CO2 balance of that feeding. But it's an important question. More questions? You must have more questions.
Hi, I guess it's not really a question but a comment. To build on Mr. Lundin's point, I wanted to ask you, you listed in one of the, we talked about consumption and eco-labeling as a choice of reducing the pressure. What about plant-based diet? Where does that fit into the equation?
This gets into changing human diet preferences. And I agree very much with Carl Lundin that the solution lies in aquaculture. If we are actually going to feed the hungry parts of this planet from aquatic sources. I've been to workshops where the FAO research facility in Manila has developed strains of tilapia, which are crosses of wild species from different, one from West Africa, one from the southernmost part of Africa, which eat, they're strictly herbivorous diet. They grow off agricultural waste of small-scale farmers. And you can have a pond on your farm and produce